people are very open about mistakes, usually when they've been super successful, right? Like you never catch someone in the middle of their mistakes and be like, hey, do you want to talk about that a little bit more? Well, I think that you're in a position, where you've had success at Mercado Libre, obviously like incredible success. And, would love to hear about your biggest mistakes when you were building Mercado Libre. This is a question from Carlos. And then maybe talk about that as an investor as well and the mistakes that you've made and what you learned from them.
Sure. So it's also a great question. I think that one big mistake that we did was at the beginning, we raised close to $8 million in our first institutional round of financing. And we always talk with our entrepreneurs, and whenever they use the word we are going to spend, we tell them, no, you're going to invest, right? And making sure that you have that concept in mind. You're investing because you're building something that will give you some return in the future. It's not that you're just spending. In our first few months with Mercado Libre, we didn't spend, we burned capital. So it was really, really, really inefficient. Those $8 million went most to basically nowhere. We invested too much on advertising when there was a very low internet penetration in the region. So we were chasing users that were not out there, right? So we had to, we would have been much, much better investing that capital into technology with a much longer time frame, those kind of things. So that was a big mistake. Obviously, we were lucky enough to raise more capital and then again, more capital. So that saved us. But I think we made a big mistake there. As an investor, we did not invest in a few companies that today are unicorns. And I can name two, dLocal and eBanks. And we had the chance of investing in those businesses very early on. We always liked the teams, but somehow maybe we didn't understand well the business or we overrated the risks and decided not to invest. And those are the mistakes that are really painful because those today are multi-billion-dollar companies. And maybe we would have invested 10, 15, maybe $5 million there. And today that would have been a few times the fund that would have invested there. So those are the mistakes you cannot afford to have, or no, we cannot afford to have many of those. Then there are other mistakes. That is when you're dealing with your portfolio, when to sell a company. And when we had both mistakes, in one case, I remember that there was an offer from a global player that tried to acquire one of our companies. And it was a $100 million acquisition, so it was not gigantic. But for a first fund, for a company that was doing fine, but not, it was not a rocket to the moon, that could have been a good exit. We put some pressure there saying we think this is the best outcome, but the entrepreneurs did not agree with that and ended up rejecting that. And then we ended up selling the company for $5 million. So really, we regret that decision. But it's not, instead of getting not even our money back, we would have gotten, I don't know, maybe $20, $30 million, which would have been nice, but that wouldn't have changed the trajectory of that fund. But then at the opposite side, we once sold a company early on, and then that company became part of a larger group and ended up being also multi-billion-dollar opportunity. So those are the mistakes that are more painful. As we always say, when you invest in the wrong company, you have limited downside because you cannot lose more than the money you invested there. But when you miss a big winner, the sky's the limit, right? So you really, there's no cap to the upside you could have generated with that opportunity. So that's one thing. And then a second mistake, and now being an investor, I can see it. But I think we somehow, out of luck and out of a conscious decision, we pick the right investors in our first round. But then in our second round, we did not pick the right ones. And when things went tough, those investors were more a drag than being supportive to the company, right? And by the way, at some point in time, the lead investor of that second round wanted to shut down the company. And And they were really close to accomplishing that because they were putting pressure on all the other investors and really convincing them that it didn't make any sense to keep the company open, that the best possible outcome was to return whatever capital was left in the bank to the shareholders. So I think we always tell entrepreneurs, and it looks like a theoretical answer, that you will know whether you've selected the right investors when tough times come. But that's a reality, and we experienced that firsthand. So those are some of the few mistakes we've made. Obviously, when you're building for the future with lots of uncertainty, you make lots of mistakes. That's not a problem. The thing is that you need to make sure that you don't make those mistakes that you cannot recover from, right? And I think those two mistakes, burning too much capital at the beginning, then partnering with the wrong investor, were two mistakes that were close to killing the company.